The knock came just after sunset, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the peaceful hum of the evening. I had been setting the table for dinner, the smell of baked lasagna filling the house. Ethan, my 15-year-old son, was upstairs in his room, likely lost in his world of gaming. It was supposed to be an ordinary night in an ordinary life until I opened the door. There she was, Laura, my ex-wife. 7 years had passed since she walked out on me and Ethan, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and unspoken betrayals. She looked different now, worn down in a way that expensive makeup couldn't hide. Her hair was pulled back hastily, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something darker, fear. Beside her stood a girl no older than 6, clutching a tattered bunny to her chest, her face half hidden behind Laura's leg. For a moment, all I could do was stare. "Laura," I finally said, my voice carrying a mix of shock and anger. "What are you doing here?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, tears welled up in her eyes. She tightened her grip on the girl's hand and whispered, "I need your help." I wanted to slam the door in her face. Every instinct screamed at me to send her away, to protect the life I had rebuilt after she destroyed it. But then I looked down at the child, frail, scared, and shivering in the cold. I couldn't turn them away, not without hearing the full story. "Come in," I said reluctantly, stepping aside. "But you have 5 minutes." They stepped into the warmth of the house, and Laura exhaled a shaky breath as if crossing the threshold had taken all her strength. She looked around, her gaze lingering on the family photos on the mantel, photos that no longer included her. "Daddy!" Ethan's voice came from the top of the stairs. When he saw who was standing in the entryway, his face darkened. "What the hell is she doing here?" "Watch your mouth," I snapped, but Ethan wasn't listening. He stormed down the stairs, his fists clenched. "You've got some nerve showing up here," he spat at Laura. "Ethan, please," Laura said, her voice cracking. "I just need to." "No," Ethan interrupted, his anger sharp and unyielding. "You don't get to just walk back into our lives like nothing happened." "Ethan, upstairs," I said firmly, but my son only glared at me. "Are you seriously letting her stay here?" he demanded. "After everything she did?" I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice. "This isn't up for discussion. Go to your room." Ethan looked at me, betrayal flickering in his eyes, before he turned on his heel and stomped back upstairs. His door slammed shut a second later. I turned back to Laura, who was now sitting on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling. The little girl climbed onto her lap, clutching her tightly. "You need to explain," I said, crossing my arms. "Now." She took a deep breath, her voice unsteady as she began. "His name is Greg. We've been together for a few years. At first, he was perfect. Charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted. But over time, he changed. He started controlling everything I did, everyone I talked to. And then he started hitting me." Her words hung in the air like a dark cloud. I wanted to feel pity, but all I could muster was frustration. "So what? You just decided to come back here? After 7 years?" "I didn't know where else to go," she said, her voice breaking. "He's dangerous, John. He's been following me, threatening me. I had to get Lila away from him." My eyes drifted to the little girl. Lila. Her head was resting on Laura's shoulder, her eyes drooping with exhaustion. "And what do you expect me to do?" I asked. "I'm not some knight in shining armor. I just need time," she said. "Time to figure out what to do. Please, John. For Lila." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time, I saw something genuine in her eyes. Desperation, yes, but also a mother's love. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Fine. You can stay for a few days. But after that, you're on your own." "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I walked to the kitchen, needing a moment to myself. My hands shook as I poured a glass of water, the weight of her presence already suffocating. 7 years ago, she had left without a backward glance, and now she was here, bringing chaos back into the home I had worked so hard to rebuild. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed without speaking to me and Laura had tucked Lila into the spare room, I found her sitting at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable. "I know you hate me," she said softly. "I don't hate you," I replied. "But I don't trust you either." She nodded as if she had expected that. "I don't blame you." We sat in silence for a long moment before she spoke again. "Do you ever think about the past? About us?" I hesitated, the memories threatening to resurface. "Not often. And when I do, it's not fondly." Her face fell, but she didn't argue. "I never stopped thinking about you and Ethan," she said. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to make things right." "You're 7 years too late," I said, standing. "Get some sleep. You'll need it." I left her sitting there, the weight of her words lingering in the air. Upstairs, I checked on Ethan, who was sprawled across his bed, his headphones on and his game controller still in his hands. I turned off the TV and pulled a blanket over him, my chest tightening at the thought of what this would do to him. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that letting Laura in was a mistake, but it was too late to take it back now. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the living room where Laura and Lila were already awake. Laura was combing Lila's hair, her movements slow and deliberate, as if trying to piece together something normal out of the chaos. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching silently for a moment before clearing my throat. "Coffee's ready," I said. Laura looked up, her expression briefly startled before it softened. "Thanks," she murmured, standing and guiding Lila toward the table. "Say good morning, sweetie." "Good morning," Lila said shyly, clutching her bunny as she climbed into a chair. I gave her a small nod, not quite sure how to interact with her yet. She was innocent in all this, but her presence was a constant reminder of the mess Laura had brought into my home. I poured 2 mugs of coffee and set one in front of Laura before taking a seat across from her. "Did you sleep?" I asked. "Not much," she admitted, wrapping her hands around the mug as if it were a lifeline. "Every noise. I kept thinking it might be him. I didn't need to ask who he was. The idea of Greg showing up here again made my jaw tighten." "We'll talk about that later," I said. "For now, eat something. You're going to need your strength." Laura nodded, but she didn't touch the toast I'd set out. Instead, she focused on getting Lila to eat, her voice soft and encouraging. It was a side of her I hadn't seen before, a tenderness I didn't remember from when Ethan was little. Maybe she'd changed more than I thought. Ethan's footsteps thundered down the stairs, and he appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair tousled and his face set in a scowl. "Morning," he muttered, avoiding eye contact with everyone as he grabbed a piece of toast and stuffed it in his mouth. "Ethan," I said, my tone firm, "sit down. We need to talk." "I don't want to talk," he snapped, but he sat anyway, glaring at the table. "What's there to talk about? She's here and you're letting her stay. End of story." "Watch your tone," I warned. Ethan rolled his eyes, but he stayed quiet. Laura shifted uncomfortably, her gaze flicking between us. "Ethan, I know you're upset," she began. "Upset?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "You think I'm just upset? You left us, and now you're back like nothing happened. And you expect me to be okay with it?" "I don't expect anything," Laura said, her voice trembling. "I just want to explain." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Explain? What's there to explain? You cheated. You left. End of story." "That's enough," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "We're not doing this right now." Ethan shoved his chair back with a loud scrape and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Laura flinched, her shoulders sagging. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause more problems." "Let him cool off," I said. "He's angry, but he'll deal with it in his own time." Laura nodded, but the guilt in her eyes didn't fade. The day passed uneventfully, though the air in the house remained thick with unspoken words. Ethan spent most of it out with his friends, and I kept myself busy with errands, giving Laura and Lila space. When I returned in the late afternoon, I noticed a black SUV parked down the street. My stomach dropped. I stepped out of my car and stared at it for a long moment. The engine was off and the windows were tinted too dark to see inside. Could have been anyone's vehicle, but something about it felt wrong. I walked toward the house, my eyes darting back to the SUV every few steps. Inside, Laura was in the living room, folding a blanket while Lila played on the floor with her bunny. I closed the door and locked it, then turned to her. "There's a car parked down the street," I said. "A black SUV. Does that sound familiar?" Her face went pale. "Greg's car is black," she said, her voice barely audible. I nodded, trying to stay calm. "I don't know if it's him, but I'm not taking any chances. I'm calling the police." "No!" Laura grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "If you call them, it'll just make things worse. He'll find a way to make it worse." I stared at her, torn between frustration and disbelief. Worse than what? Worse than him sitting out there, waiting for the right moment to do God knows what. Laura's grip loosened, and she stepped back, her hands trembling. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "Then make me understand," I said, "because right now, it feels like you're hiding something." Her eyes darted to Lila, who was still engrossed in her game, oblivious to the tension. "Not here," she said quietly. "Let's talk in the kitchen." I followed her, my patience wearing thin. Once we were out of earshot, she leaned against the counter, her face a mask of fear and regret. "Greg isn't just some jealous ex," she said. "He's connected. He knows people, dangerous people." "What does that even mean?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. "What kind of trouble are we talking about?" Laura hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "He's involved in some business dealings, illegal ones. Drugs, money laundering, I don't know the full extent. But he has people who do his dirty work for him. If he wants something or someone, he gets it." My mind reeled as I tried to process her words. "And you brought this to my doorstep?" I hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I didn't know where else to go," she said, tears streaming down her face. I thought he wouldn't look for me here. I thought I could keep Lila safe." I rubbed a hand over my face, trying to think. "We can't stay here," I said finally. "Not if he knows where you are." Laura's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean we need to leave," I said. "Pack some essentials. We'll figure out the rest later." "What about Ethan?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'll handle Ethan," I said. "Just do what I said." As I turned to leave the kitchen, I caught sight of movement outside the window. The SUV was gone. A chill ran down my spine, and I knew that whatever came next, it wouldn't be easy. But I had to protect my family, no matter what it took. The safe house was a nondescript cabin tucked into a wooded area miles outside of town. Its faded brown siding and overgrown yard made it look like a place time had forgotten. But it was safe, or at least that's what the officer who arranged it had assured me. It felt like the best option, even if it was just a temporary solution. We arrived late in the evening, the sky painted in deep purples and blacks. Lila had fallen asleep in the back seat, her bunny still clutched tightly in her hands. Ethan, arms crossed and jaw set, hadn't spoken a word since we'd left the house. Laura sat in silence beside me, staring out the window with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and despair. As I turned off the car and stepped out, the crisp night air wrapped around me. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel underfoot. I opened the back door to unbuckle Lila, careful not to wake her. Laura took her from me, holding her close as we made our way to the cabin. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of wood and dust. It was sparse but functional. A single bedroom with a twin bed, a couch that pulled out into a second, and a small kitchen with just enough space for essentials. I set our bags down and turned to Ethan, who was standing in the doorway with his arms still crossed. "This is it?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is where we're hiding out?" "For now," I said. "It's not ideal, but it's safe." Ethan snorted, shaking his head. "Safe? Yeah, sure. Until her psycho boyfriend finds us. Enough? I snapped, my patience frayed. We didn't have a choice. You didn't have a choice, Ethan shot back. I didn't get a say in any of this. I took a step toward him, lowering my voice. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to upend our lives because of her? I pointed toward Laura, who was sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped protectively around Lila. I'm trying to keep us alive, Ethan. So, unless you have a better plan, you can drop the attitude. Ethan glared at me for a moment before stomping off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly to calm myself. I'll talk to him, Laura said softly. No, I replied. Let him cool off. He's angry, and he has every right to be. She nodded, looking down at Lila, who was still asleep in her arms. I'll put her to bed. As she carried Lila to the pull-out couch, I grabbed my phone and stepped outside. The night felt heavier than before, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I dialed Detective Miller's number, pacing as I waited for him to pick up. Miller, he answered, his voice clipped. It's me, I said. We're at the safe house. Any updates? He sighed. Nothing yet. We've got patrols watching your house. But there's no sign of Greg. We're working on tracking him, but it'll take time. Time we don't have, I muttered. I know, Miller said. Just sit tight and stay out of sight. I'll call as soon as I have something. I ended the call and leaned against the car, staring into the trees. The stillness felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that Greg was already one step ahead of us. The first night passed uneventfully, though none of us slept well. I took the couch, letting Laura and Lila have the bedroom, while Ethan claimed the recliner in the corner. Every creak of the cabin made my nerves jangle, and I found myself sitting up every hour, listening for anything out of the ordinary. By morning, the tension in the cabin was palpable. Ethan avoided Laura entirely, only speaking to me in clipped sentences. Laura tried to keep things normal for Lila, but even a 6-year-old could sense that something was wrong. She stayed close to her mother, her wide eyes darting around the room as if expecting danger to burst through the walls at any moment. By the third day, the strain was becoming unbearable. Ethan's anger had turned into sullen silence, and Laura was visibly unraveling. I tried to hold it together for all of us, but I was nearing my breaking point. And that's when everything came crashing down. It was late afternoon when I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. My heart leapt into my throat as I looked out the window. A black SUV was pulling up the dirt road, its headlights cutting through the shadows of the trees. He's here, I said, my voice tight. Laura's face went pale. She grabbed Lila and pulled her close. What do we do? Stay here, I said, grabbing the baseball bat I had brought from the house. Lock the door behind me. John, no, Laura pleaded. You can't. Do it, I said sharply, cutting her off. Now. She hesitated, then nodded, her hands trembling as she locked the door behind me. I stepped outside, gripping the bat tightly as the SUV came to a stop. The driver's door opened, and Greg stepped out, his movements slow and deliberate. Well, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. You really thought you could hide from me? My grip on the bat tightened. This ends here, Greg. Leave now, or I swear I'll make you regret it. He laughed, the sound cold and cruel. You? Make me regret it? That's cute. He took a step closer, and I swung the bat, aiming for his legs. But he was faster than I anticipated, dodging the blow and grabbing my arm. We struggled, the bat falling to the ground as he shoved me against the car. You've got guts. I'll give you that, Greg said, his face inches from mine. But you're out of your league. I kneed him in the stomach, throwing him off balance, and scrambled for the bat. Before I could reach it, I heard the cabin door burst open. Stop! Laura's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. She was holding a small handgun, her hands shaking but her aim steady. Get away from him, Greg. Greg froze, his eyes narrowing as he took in the weapon. You don't have the guts, he sneered. Try me. Laura said, her voice cold. This ends now. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Greg raised his hands and backed away. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and venomous. He climbed back into the SUV and drove off, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Laura lowered the gun, her hands trembling as she turned to me. Are you okay? I nodded, breathing heavily. Where did you get that? From my bag, she said. I didn't think I'd have to use it. I looked at her, a mix of gratitude and disbelief coursing through me. You just might have saved all of us. As the dust settled, I realized that things would never truly go back to normal. But for the first time, I felt like we had a chance to move forward. Together. Your thoughts matter. Share them in the comments. Don't forget to hit like and explore more thrilling tales on our channel.